Okay, good afternoon everyone. Day 7. I think that's how I tend to start off these talking shop talks. This is perhaps our most extended of the talking shop talks that we've got in IF 2012. And we've got a wealth of people behind me and a wealth of people in front of me who hopefully will have an interesting discussion and exchange of views and information over the next hour and 20 minutes. IF Festival, both in 2010 and in 2012, we have presented very significant pieces of work which engage with absolutely the theme of climate change through artwork. In 2010 we commissioned Yannick Schaefer to create the incredible Asleep at the Wheel installation that was presented in the old Sainsbury's, which getting on for 8,000 or 9,000 people saw over the first 10 days of that inaugural festival. We are very proud to be presenting Wired's As the World Tipped for 2 nights. Last night was the first night. I can see a number of people who were here watching that. It was a very special experience, I think, for the 2,000 people who gathered together at 10 o'clock last night to see that. So it's an interesting area, and we feel it's something that, there's many areas that needs to be discussed, and people, what's wrong with discussion? I would like to thank, before we sort of go into the discussion, I hand over to Joe, our partners who have made it possible to actually specifically present As the World Tipped. It is a very large undertaking to present that scale of work, which we hope over the 2 nights will, play to more than 5,000 people. So the Parks Trust, as well as giving the lovely site, have also invested in the project. The Co-op membership have invested specifically in presenting As the World Tipped. Our local university here, the Open University, they have invested in bringing As the World Tipped here, but also very much in terms of this event, in terms of making sure that this event had a good form. So thank you, Joe, for that. And of course our friends at Nifty Lifts, who local company, very interested in their role in the community, and their investment was the final thing that tipped the balance, that meant that we could bring the show here. So I would like to thank them, because they're very important. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to your chair for the next hour and hopefully only 18 minutes. I hope I haven't gone on for more than 2 minutes there. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks, Bill, for the opportunity today, not least to see the show tonight. 2,000 people saw it last night, the same again tonight. I think that's a real impact. And it's also a good excuse for us to take a bit of space to think and talk about this topic together ourselves. The first thing I'd like to do before we do anything else is give you a chance to talk together in groups of 2s or 3 for just a few minutes, not more than 5 minutes, on 2 questions, simple questions. The first is, what's the first time you came across climate change? Can you recall when you first came across the notion of climate change? Was it a school project? Was it a TV show, newspaper article? Was it a dance performance? It surprised me. The second is what you think has been the most influential piece of cultural work on climate change. It might be a film, TV, from the arts, from a whole range of possibilities. And the only exclusion to this is, of course, you're not allowed to mention As the World Tipped, because I think we'll talk about that a little bit today, in any case. So just in 2s or 3s, this is a big initiative test. Can you identify groups of 2 or 3? I'll help you if you can't. We'll just take a few minutes over this, thanks. And then I'll ask some of you just to talk about it. Thanks. Well, it's usually a good sign to interrupt conversations. We will make more space for you to talk more later. But I'd just like to invite people to maybe offer some thoughts from that exercise. I find it very difficult to answer both of those questions, actually. Is anyone capable of answering either of them? You're all very chatty, so I get the sense that someone might have something to say. Thank you.
For me, I'd like to answer the second question, which was the cultural experience that had the most impact on me, and it has to be the Yannick Schaefer. I was not an early adopter of concern about global warming. I was paying attention and I was reading, but I'm guilty of doing one of those 80s stuff. Must have stuff, must grow. I emerged from the Yannick Schaefer exhibition. I collapsed in a chair from it, and I was nearly weeping.
Can you talk a bit more about the work, about what
The work was an installation in an old supermarket, so that in itself was a symbol of consumerism. The supermarket had been stripped out, and the old cars had been installed, again a symbol of consumerism, and into those cars were recordings of discussions about global warming. And as you sat in the car, you listened to discussions of varying sorts. Some of them were sceptic, some of them were proselytizing, and some of them were just intellectual discussions, factual discussions. I found it so revealing that I could hardly control myself at the end. I had no idea, having pursued growth through the whole of my career, that growth was not necessarily a good thing. And suddenly I saw it for what it is and the impact that it has on the environment.
Thanks very much. I hope that Bill's got that in his impact statement for last year's festival. That's exactly what we're after. But that's the kind of growth we want. Can anyone add anything into that? Does someone want to? I'm tempted to lure Robin in at this point. I was going to say he's an old timer, but we've talked together for a long time. Robin, do you want to offer something?
Well, I was trying to remember when I first became aware of climate change, and I think probably my first intimation of it was in 1972 or around in the early 70s. But it was a different interpretation of climate change. There was a guy called Peter Chapman, who was at the Open University where I just joined, and he was talking about global warming due to the heat released from burning fossil fuels, and not from CO2 capturing the greenhouse effect. So it's a kind of wrong interpretation of climate change, but he was raising the issue in the early 70s.
Can I ask anyone who wants to come in with another meeting? We've had an artwork, we've had some education in higher education. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in with some other thoughts on that, just to set some questions rolling. No? You're an unusually shy lot, but I don't think that'll last long. What I'd like to do now is introduce the panel, but we want to keep this as a conversation running throughout. So I want to encourage you not to hesitate to come in with questions and comments throughout. We've got some good experience and expertise in the audience as well as on the panel. I'm going to give the briefest of introduction to the panel. Honestly, it could take a long time if I were to fill out the full story. There's a fantastic body of experience on this set of questions, but I'm going to ask them to just draw that out in the answer to the questions. Peter Gingold from Tipping Point, which has worked for years now to bring together artists, scientists, researchers and policy people to spend a couple of days together to just crunch through the topic, and has generated some fantastically imaginative responses to the difficulties of engaging with this question. And of course, the production that we're going to see tonight, some of us and some saw last night, was a Tipping Point commission in the development phase. Wendy Hesketh from Wired Aerial, thank you for being the real excuse we're here, actually, I think, in the sense that as the world gives us our reason for gathering. And Judith Knight is Director of Arts Admin, London-based, has particularly focused in their work on climate change at various points, both the nuts and bolts of how to think sensibly about housekeeping, but also bringing new creative work into the world. And Ben Norbury is from the Co-op and is one of their climate change specialists, and will bring a perspective from one of the first and biggest ethical companies in the UK. Actually, I think it can call itself the first ethical company in the UK. And Helen Wright from Greener Festival. So I'm going to ask them to respond to the questions that you've all had, but also perhaps respond to some of the comments we've had. So, wishing to sort of distinguish between some of the housekeeping issues that are always raised about how green is your festival, from the kind of deeper engagement of people in the actual work. I just want to kick off by inviting, at a nuts and bolts level, starting from right to left, Helen, to both respond to the questions I set, but also maybe fill out how you then arrived at working with Greener Festival.
I found it quite hard to answer that question because there's quite a grey area in there when I first discovered there was climate change. Because I've always grown up being, being economic with resources, and that's how my family brought me up. So I don't really remember exactly when it was. It was probably while watching a David Attenborough documentary, but I can't really pinpoint when it was because I was obviously very young. So what was the other question you asked me?
Well, which do you think has been the most influential in general or on you in the years since?
I've seen so many that I couldn't honestly say. I mean, obviously working with Yannick, I was the project manager on Asleep at the Wheel, and I'm really pleased to hear your comments. They're amazing. And yeah, I mean, that was like that was a really enlightening journey, because obviously I knew about it, but I didn't really know everything about it in quite that depth. So I mean, that was quite an interesting journey, and being a project manager on that, I was quite keen to make sure that we did everything from a nuts and bolts level, and sort of practiced what we preached, and looked at the supply chain and looked at where our materials were coming from, and that's really what a Greener Festival does, is it tries to engage music and arts festivals in ensuring that they are as resourceful as they can be with what they're doing, so that they look locally for their suppliers, for their staff, that they try and encourage people to use public transport and not to use their cars, that they think about procurement, and sort of that their caterers are doing the same thing, and that philosophy comes from the core, and it comes from within that organisation, and then that's disseminated out to everyone they work with, and that from the Greener Festival point of view would be an outstanding festival, that someone that achieved that.
Can I then ask a question of Ben, not specifically about the co-op, but you might draw on your own examples, about what it is that the corporate sector, the suppliers, the financiers can do to enable people to do the right thing. There's clearly plenty of will in this sector. What do you lot have to do?
I think it's key to sort of, if we know something, not to always just leave it to the consumer to act. You can't rely on necessarily the green consumer or the ethical consumer, because it's not enough of the market to make a real impact. So for example, well, not really climate change related, but on our tea, we only sell fair trade tea, and it's like choice editing, and so we realised that we should be getting all our tea sold this way, so actually we'll just stop selling the stuff we think isn't as ethical as it should be, and we'll sell the most ethical option only. And if you buy tea from the co-op, you get fair trade tea. Things like that, we can sort of, if we know, then we should be sort of almost enforcing it ourselves, and don't give people the choice to act.
And what would that look like in the cultural sector, choice editing in the cultural sector? Tea's a pretty easy one. You can turn the tap off for non-ethical tea.
Yeah.
So how do you run a festival in a way where you've already edited some of the choices around transport or energy? Are there any really shining examples? Others might want to come in on this.
Yeah, I mean, my experience of festivals have usually been on the other side of it, where I'm just drinking a lot and enjoying the festival itself. In terms of actual things you can do there, I mean, we've got Sabina here, we've got our membership people here who are actively sort of trying to sell the ethics of the cooperative to the people attending the festival. But you don't want to be too draconian about it, you don't want to be too harsh, that people come to the festival to have a good time and enjoy themselves without really being preached to. I haven't really got a very good answer for it, other than sort of to try and just ease it in there without being too draconian on it.
Don't be shy to come back in, Helen. Yeah.
I'd say from a greener festival point of view, one of the things we do is we run an awards scheme, and you know, shameless advertising there, but that's the award that our festivals get when they join the award and get an award, and it's a 45-point checklist that's available to anyone, regardless of whether they join the awards or not. From a greener festival point of view, we want people to share information, and we want them to be able to access it no matter how big or small they are. So there's a 45-point checklist that we ask organisers to complete in order to apply. They pay a small fee to cover expenses of 2 independent voluntary assessors. The assessor goes in, checks they're doing what they say they're doing, and then they are then part of the awards. And the idea is that year on year they improve because they become a greener festival, and they create benchmarks and they start evaluating what they're doing in order to improve. And it seems to be working very well on the whole. Most people that join the awards tend to stay with them and continue to improve.
Is there any risk for them in getting involved? Are there reputational risks in falling short once they've?
No, but we don't tell anyone that fails.
Is that a mistake, do you think?
No, it's very important for us to be positive about it and make practical, give organisers practical ways to improve and to be positive and not to be gloomy and not to point the finger. Actually, if you decide to go on that journey, then that's a really positive thing that should be celebrated.
I think a festival or night out events are a really brilliant opportunity to kind of change the tone around, or rather open up other kinds of tone around how we think about environmental issues, because they're not generally associated with having a good time. Actually, I think it's something that Michael Eavis in Glastonbury achieved a long time ago.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's so great about festivals, being able to share that ethos and encourage their audiences. I mean, there was 2.25 million people attended a festival that had a Greener Festival Award, and at those festivals they work hard to communicate with their audiences those kind of values. And I think that's a captive audience that arts and music festivals can share that kind of information, encourage that kind of audience behaviour.
Well, yes, please do, yeah.
We've just come back from performing in Tollwood in Munich, which is the most amazing festival, but it really focuses on looking after our planet, and both from a performer's point of view who took the show there, but also somebody that also took we really enjoyed the festival at the same time. It's almost like having a festival that is dedicated to really paying attention to all of that. You buy into it, so everybody that is at the festival buys into it. You know what I mean? So it just that the outreach that comes from a festival having that as a main focus is absolutely vast. It's not just what happens then, but what happens from it. Do you know what I mean?
No, I mean, I don't want to lower the tone, but it struck me that at latitude, or otherwise known as latitude or platitude, the composting toilets are by far the best available on site. And part of the reason is that, unlike the Swedes, the Britons are frightened of composting toilets. And so no one uses them. They're fantastically empty, fantastically clean, and of course, leaving a much smaller environmental impact. I won't dwell on that further. But it does, I think, make sense to talk to Judith a bit about the work you've done in a central... Yeah, listen, if you just give me a bit of time, there is a link, okay? It's a food link, okay, further upstream. Okay, stop digging. The arts admin events tell us a bit about how you run something not in the middle of a field, but right in the middle of a city. And they are, if I were to ask my question about most impactful and favourite events, then actually Crayfish Bob's would be among them. You might want to talk a bit more about them, but it was something about allowing me to think about environmental change and talk about it with others in a way that was really pleasurable.
It was. Crayfish Bob's was a wonderful project by an artist called Claire Patey, who has actually taken this issue on board. I mean, for me, any artist making work about this issue has really got to believe it. It doesn't work unless they take it on board absolutely seriously, and she's always done that. And for one of our festivals that we're called 2 Degrees, we've done one last summer and in 2009, and there'll be one in 2013. Claire did this wonderful project where, amazingly, the weather was nice, and we've got a rather lovely courtyard in our building in East London, and she had all the tables laid out with these white tablecloths and English wine and foraged salad, and most importantly of all, a wonderful man called Crayfish Bob, who fishes out at the Thames. I have to say, higher up the Thames, nearer to Oxford than down in the London part of the Thames, invasive crayfish. In other words, American crayfish, not our own British crayfish, and they are an invasive species, and they're eating up all the others and everything else as well. So he fishes them out, and he has this wonderful shack, and he served them up, and you could then eat the crayfish, eat the foraged salad, drink the English wine, and in this wonderful environment, and talk, indeed, that was very much part of it, with other people around about the issues of climate change. But Claire also does, you've probably heard about in London, she does this big feast on the bridge every year as part of the Thames Festival, so a lot of her work is about food and how we source it and what we do.
I think it's worth actually pausing for a bit more on Feast on the Bridge, because I think that extends to a much greater scale. I mean, Crayfish Bob's was, a quaint little yard with enough for space for 30 people. Feast on the Bridge shuts one of central London's main bridges. Do you want to
Southwark Bridge. I mean, I never organised it. It's part of Thames Festival. It closes Southwark Bridge, and there's huge tables, and there's food you can buy or you can take your own, and basically the whole bridge becomes a fantastic dinner picnic right across, and it lasts all evening, and there's entertainment and everything else. But actually London for once stops, and you can walk where you never normally can, and it sort of becomes owned by the pedestrian, and it's a very special event. And a lot of Claire's work is that big scale, visible. She did a thing for Channel 4 ages ago, but beautiful installation right across Trafalgar Square showing how many cups and tea with bottles of milk each person will consume in their life and things like that. But we do this festival, which is small. I mean, it's only a small festival, it's only a week long, and it's we got European money with another 11 organisations for an organisation called Imagine 2020, and all of these organisations are presenting work on the issue of climate change, whether small projects like that or very large scale. They're also looking, indeed, as we were talking about with Helen, about how we tour our work, trying to change the way in the 80s we used to just zip across, as soon as cheap flights came out, fly around all over the place. So it's looking at all those ways, how we create the work, how we make the work, how we tour the work, as well as presenting the work. And I think just one thing we were talking about briefly earlier was we often have this debate ourselves internally about this is a small scale, and I must say most of the people who come to it probably are totally engaged in the issue of climate change already. So it's more about activism, it's about making their voices heard and empowering those people. But then we also do, and we have done a larger scales project. We just did a very beautiful installation by an artist called Michael Pinsky, which was quite interesting because it got a lot of criticism as being a bit gloomy, but it was a very, very simple blue, looked like a neon line around 3 monuments in London. It was actually LED because it was greener, at the water level that it is possible that in 1,000 years, which is a long time, and that's a whole other issue, but where the water level will be, and of course all of London, if that were the case, would drown. We weren't allowed, unfortunately, permission to put it on Nelson's column, because I think Boris and his gang thought it was not a good signal to give about drowning London. But again, it was interesting.
I'm going to use that as a link between talking about the housekeeping issues, what it is to keep a good house in environmental terms for cultural institutions, and the kind of doing, thinking, changing the way we think about our place in the world that climate change provokes. I'm going to borrow a friend of mine, Stephen Peake. Stephen is going to play the role of a leading climate change expert, and by happy coincidence he is a leading climate change expert. Just not the one in the novel. So Stephen's from the Maths, Computing and Technology department in the OU, and he's going to play the role here of Michael Beard, who is a character in Ian McEwan's Solar. Thank you, Stephen.
After outlining what he expected to read next year in the third IPCC report, Aldous told Beard, and was the 50th person to do so in the last 12 months, that the last 10 years of the 20th century had been the warmest 10, or was it 9, on record. Then he was musing on climate sensitivity, the temperature rise associated with a doubling of CO2 above pre-industrial levels. As they entered London proper, As they entered London proper, it was radiative forcing. And after that, it was then the familiar litany of shrinking glaciers, encroaching deserts, dissolving coral reefs, disrupted ocean currents, rising sea levels, disappearing this and disappearing that and so on, while Beard sank into a gloom of inattention, not because the planet was in peril, that moronic word again, but because someone was telling him it was with such enthusiasm. This was what he disliked about political people. Injustice and calamity animated them. It was their milk, their lifeblood. It pleasured them.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Stephen. Well, I hope you'll come in and talk a bit more about your own experiences working with the topic. Stephen worked with the UN framework on climate change for many years.
And I knew the real Beard.
And he knew, well, yes. So I hope you'll come back on that. I just want to go back to the close to the last sentence. Beard sank into a gloom of inattention, not because the planet was in peril, that moronic word again, but because someone was telling him it with such enthusiasm. I think there is a huge challenge for us to do a suitably broad range of cultural work on climate change. We've tended, guided I think by environmental NGOs, to focus on a rather narrow range of emotions. Essentially, we'll frighten you, and then if you're not frightened enough, we'll frighten you again. I want to ask Peter Gingold, who took up a challenge in 2005 to try to do something about that, to widen the cultural conversation. Just tell us a bit about where you started, how it went, in terms of bringing together the arts and science and policy worlds.
Sure, thank you. Well, we've been, as Joe says, doing this for 7 years, and the format we've chosen to do it in is in 2-day events. We're slightly resistant to calling them conferences, but they're where we simply invite people, artists in the broadest possible sense, writers, musicians, theatre people, etc., 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 to engage with people who have expertise in one form or other of climate, be it atmospheric physics, be it oceanography, be it economics, be it whatever, and invite and engage in conversation in as many different possible ways, in the hope that and indeed the expectation, well founded, that leads to imaginative. Well, it certainly leads to imaginative discussions, but also to new ideas, new thoughts, inspiration, and that it can lead to collaborations between people in the arts and the sciences, or maybe someone goes off and has an individual thought which they then pursue. And while we certainly wouldn't want to take all the credit for Ian McEwan's novel, he's been to one of our events, and he has he spent a long time thinking through how on earth do you write a novel that deals with this enormously complex and difficult problem without sounding as though you're sounding like George Monbiot, or the aim of the artist is to develop a different voice from the ones that we're familiar with. Campaigning, if you like, or simply from a scientific perspective, telling what is believed to be the facts, and it's extremely hard, because the temptation to, as somebody said earlier, the temptation to preach, it's death to art, and it's not hard to it's a trap that's extremely easy to fall into. Can we talk a bit about how Can we talk a bit about how this have an audience, pick a microphone, any microphone. Can you talk a bit about how the kind of work you want this project as the World Tip to do with the audiences coming here? What are your hopes for it?
Oh gosh, my hopes. Actually, can I can I try and finish with that? I just want to lead on really from what you were saying, because I think our piece, sorry to just talk about ours, but I suppose that's why I'm here. The great thing is there's different things for audiences, different reasons for them to come to see the show. That doesn't have to start with climate change. And I think it's just a really almost clever way of maybe getting more support in climate change. So you've got a stage that starts at horizontal, goes into vertical position, so people might come just to see what that is, how that happens.
You spoiled it for me now.
Sorry. Take that back. Or people might come because they've heard that there's, close your ears, interactive projection work. Or people might come because they love circus, or they are interested in aerial work. And so, and I think they're all really important reasons to get somebody there, and then to tackle the issue of climate change in the way that we do is another way of engaging. And I also think that in the way that the show is presented, we've always been a little bit concerned with the whole preaching and lecturing situation, and I think obviously there's lots of different opinions on whether we do that or not, but I think that some people might come for one thing and get another with the show, and I'm really happy about that. Yeah, exactly that. That's all.
Do you think that it matters if the engagement they have with the show is pretty light? If it's about telling about how amazing it looked, if the spectacle is all they take away?
I think that might be a hook point. I think they'll see it as a spectacle. If they sense no engagement at all, they might see it as a spectacle. But what you don't know is when that impact will hit. You know, because there's quite a few people that blog that say, oh, you know, I've never seen anything like it. I didn't realise you were attached to a rope, and only when we finally saw it when you fell in the first storm sequence, when I managed to catch my heart and put it back in my body, did I actually realise that you were safe, and you know, you took us on this amazing journey. And then at the end of that, they'll say, and now I have, you know, gained an interest. I'm looking into different things, and I think it's not always obvious, the sense of engagement. I think it can happen definitely after the event.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I totally agree, you can't preach, and there's lots and lots of works on climate change that are funny, and there's an artist who lives in Amsterdam, I think now, but he did a thing where he asked the audience to make a promise that they would do various things and not fly, not do this, but every time they made a promise they got a swig of vodka, so by the time they'd finished the whole audience was complete, and it was a very funny, Davis Freeman he's called, and it
Bill,
was just
can we afford that?
But you know, so there are ways of getting the issue across that are completely not preachy, but also just engaging. And one of the films we did, Ackroyd and Harvey are two artists we work with quite often, and we commissioned a series called What on Earth, looking at the future of the planet, not just the planet, but how we all live. And their film was a 3-minute film, and it was called Out of the Blue, and it was actually very, very simple, 3 minutes of looking at entrails of aeroplanes across the sky. And then Heather talks a voiceover about what it was like when the volcano erupted and nobody could fly, and we just saw this exquisite just blue, just blue, and then that's all it was. And then there's just a very simple strapline at the end saying when those aeroplanes that didn't fly in that period of time would have emitted however much carbon. So the volcano was the first negative carbon volcano that had ever had, you know, its impact had been negative because of the flights. And it was a very, very simple, beautiful piece of film, and it wasn't preachy, it was just really making a clear, simple point in a very beautiful way. And I think there's millions of ways of doing it.
Joe, could I just add in another example, actually, from Simon Beaufoy. Some of you may know, he's the scriptwriter who wrote the Full Monty, among other things, and Slumdog Millionaire screenplay. And his solution, his artistic solution to the challenge of how do you do it without preaching, was in a 2-part television series. I don't know if anyone saw it, called Burn Up. It was about 4 years ago on the BBC, joint production of the Canadians, not the Americans, oddly. And his way of treating the subject in a TV drama was to make it into a thriller. So it was very much a thriller, and then there was a goodie and a baddie and love scenes, it was all there. Plus, there was also the context was an oil company and issues about climate change. So there are lots of, if you like, artistic solutions to the probably central challenge of preaching, but they do take a bit of finding.
Yes, so the baddies in that in the script for that struck me as really being overwritten, entirely exaggerated. But he now looks like a clairvoyant, really. Anyway, sorry, Helen, you wanted to come in, I think, on that.
I was just going to say that I think one of the things that's important is programming this kind of material for children that's light and gets the message across and is engaging. And I've seen something today, actually. Green and Pleasant Land at Milton Keynes Festival Fringe was fantastic this afternoon. And what they did is they gave everyone I Choose a Plan B card, and it's got 5 tips on it of things you can do. And it was just a really engaging and funny way that was accessible for lots of different people. And I just think that it's very important that we're not too gloomy, and that we do actually give people practical points that they can take on in their lives, and that we address those issues with children, because they're the people that are going to be enforcing it to their children. So it's fine that we're doing it now, but we really need to ensure that that programming is for children as well.
Just before I bring Ben in, I'm just going to warn you, just after he's added something in, I'm going to return to you. If you leave me in the unhappy position of having nothing to offer as an audience in the way of a question or comment, I'm just going to pick randomly, okay? So encourage your neighbours and colleagues to, have something to say. Put them forward. You're looking a little more sort of interested now. That's good. Okay. Ben, I wanted to ask you, here in the arts sector, universities, we're being told to go to business to find out how we engage people, how we draw people into our way of thinking. There may be things wrong with that model, but you're the best person we can ask on the panel about it. Can you tell us where the Co-op's thinking is around this moment?
Funnily enough, I was going to say we come to the arts to communicate our messages, because we have, say, 7 million members who own our business, like in the UK, and we have a target to engage with 500,000 of them every year on our ethical sort of stances and things like that. And it's how would you do that if it's just through our sustainability report saying how good we've been at reducing our emissions? No one's really going to take it on board. It's pretty boring, which is a shame because that's part of my job. So we utilise the arts in sort of every field we can. And without them, our message is really dull, dry and boring, and you end up, when you're trying to send a message to government, you're relying on what you can say versus what big oil, big gas can lobby in Europe. They spend millions of pounds on it. So using the arts is the tool we choose to communicate that message sort of effectively and get people on board. And we've had loads of success with different films that have premiered in the UK. Just getting people to sign up after they've seen the film, getting communities to sort of engage. But I think it's really something part of what Wendy was saying about getting people to come because they want to see the performance, and then sort of slipping in a bit of information about climate change, maybe trying to sort of increase their awareness. Maybe they go home and a few days later they're thinking about it and they ask a few questions, and then it sort of starts to develop.
Well, Ben, I just want to pick up one phrase you used, and I ask, I think particularly you two, using the arts. It's like the phrase using the media. How do you feel about that? I mean, okay, Co-op, pretty benign, but he still wants to use you.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely up for being pimped out. Yeah, you've got to use absolutely. It's about getting it out there, and the more you get it out there, the larger kind of audience you reach, definitely, yeah.
Any hazards in there, Judith?
Yeah, there are hazards. I mean, you can't make an artist put any message across. They've got to want to do it, as I said earlier on. I mean, there's loads of commissions and all sorts of things. If the artists really believe it, then they'll do it. And I think what you can't do is make artists send messages for other people, but they won't accept it if they don't want to. So more and more, what I found interesting about the work we've been doing, and we've been doing it for 32 years now, is coming from the artists. It's not coming from us as producers. It's not coming from people saying you should be doing this. It's actually coming from them, and for me that's really important. That's why when it works, it works.
Just going to say, yeah, like the films we've taken on, we haven't told them what to do. It's generally been there's a guy in America who sort of started fighting the shale gas industry and made a documentary as he did it, and then we heard about it and then brought it over to the UK and premiered it, and now show it to community groups who may be faced with future shale gas exploration in their sort of local communities. And so yeah, it's that his initial passion is what brings it across, and then we sort of utilise that to share our position on climate change.
Thanks. But I want to get a bit more from you lot. I'm just going to let them know that in about 4 minutes I'm going to give them each one simple question. We're going to finish at 6 so that a member of our panel can go and prepare for the next performance. My question is, if you met a wealthy philanthropist at the bar who was also naive and easily suggestible, what would you give them as a task to spend their money on around climate change, public engagement, the arts? Unlimited budget up to, let's call it, 1.5 million. Okay. So I just wanted to give you the chance to come in, respond, add a layer to what we've already got. I've got a particular question for Janice knows it's coming. For a colleague, I'm interested by the fact that we haven't talked about social media at all. It's a new cultural form of the last few years. We know that people are spending a huge amount of their time in front of a screen. Janice, you're involved in a project around biodiversity and public engagement. Can you just give us a couple of sentences on what you've learned in the last couple of years, and what could climate change as a topic learn from the work you've done with iSpot, which is a biodiversity related project?
Hello, I'm also at the OU. Basically, I'm involved with a website called iSpot. It's in ispot.org.uk. And basically, it's a space, but social networking, but about nature. You know, you're always curious, you go on nature walks, you take a picture of something, you don't know what it is, you post the picture up, and the online community helps you with identification. We launched in 2009, in the middle of 2009. We now have almost 20,000 avid users. It's really taken off. It's a way to learn. So you don't appear nerdy or geeky if you love a particular plant. You can find somebody on iSpot to talk about it with. And we found that it really works in connecting the novices, so to speak, children, it doesn't matter who, with an expert to find and learn more. One of our biggest successes was a 6-year-old girl who saw a moth on her windowsill at home and said to her dad, "This looks really strange." Her dad knew about iSpot, said, "Let's take a picture of it and put it on iSpot." It was a moth the first time seen in Europe. So there you go, new discoveries, things that can be found, and learning more at the same time.
But it's a sweetened pill, isn't it? I mean, it's, you know, it's a hobby experience that people move into. Thanks, Janice. I suspect you'd know how to spend 1.5 million quid.
Oh yeah,
so,
yeah.
I'll come to you when I find them. So that we keep to time, I'm just going to ask you all to offer me a sentence or two. What would you do with this naive philanthropist's cash? Anyone want to come up first?
Hard question, Joe. No, not yet. No, I'm not first.
Okay, I'd make a film. I'd make a film, but I mean, I'd get the best artists in the world. 1.5 million probably wouldn't do it, would it? Films cost a lot more than that these days, but I think it's really hard. There's been 2 films I've seen. One is the Al Gore film and one is Franny Armstrong's film. Neither of which for me really worked. I don't think you'd have gone to Al Gore unless you'd again been engaged. Franny Armstrong's was more engaging, but again, I don't know. I think I'd make a film because film just has a wider impact. I think the idea of doing a television drama about it, and so you're going again for the same reason you're going, because it's an amazing story, it's fantastic, but it's got really, really seriously climate change at the end of it. I just think that it reaches more people than all the work we can do ourselves in theatre and art. It doesn't mean it's better, but it's a wider reach.
Helen?
I'd do a number of things. Is that all right? I'd get some investment to do lots more work in schools that sort of engage kids in those issues. I'd get some investment for a greener festival, because we're a not-for-profit organisation run entirely by volunteers, so I'd probably put a bit of money into there. And then we're running a campaign for called Festival Wood. We're trying to raise awareness of Trees for Life and transform the Caledonian forests back to Caledonian forests, and so I'd probably put some money into that as well.
I'm not saying you don't need any money, but go on. What would you do if they made your budget bigger?
Just pay George Osborne to stick to his original commitments. There we go. Basically stick to the renewable energy commitments, stick to decarbonisation of the grid, and to stick to the fit levels, which then sort of embolden renewables to become the new
And your
dominant
expenses to
source.
attend festivals, this is Peter.
Yep. Okay, I would follow the story model. I do think telling stories is one of the most powerful tools we've got going. I would assemble half a dozen of the best storytellers that we have, say, in this country, but I might see worldwide. And I think where I'd spend a lot of budget is really immersing them in the subject for a period of months, if not years, so that they really lived, breathed and slept it. I don't quite know how you'd do it if they didn't want to come. They'd probably want to have to come along for the ride. And then I think it would have to be a TV film or a TV program, a drama, or indeed a film. I think film's the answer. Film is probably the most powerful medium we have.
It's also it's also quick. I mean, one of the issues about climate change in art is it's all very lovely and it's all brilliant, but the influence is slow and we haven't got time. It's not like any other issues. And actually, films have a quicker impact, I think. You can. Yeah.
Wendy, the last word to you.
Oh gosh, I would be. I'd invest every single cent of it to take our company all over the world, and make the fees less, so that festivals, no matter how big or small, can take us. So that it's about exposure to the art and taking it to people, and I just selfishly do that for everyone's sake.
It's rather tempting to introduce you to the gentleman. No, I'm kidding. Okay, sorry. I don't want to be the last person standing between you and a cool drink, but I don't think we should view this as the close of the conversation. We've got a chance to get a drink and carry on talking. But I think we all owe a debt of thanks to our panel. Please join me and thank them in the usual way.